Frequent delays, strange behavior. I thought she was cheating on me. But the truth that came to light horrified me. My mother. My name's Alex Rivers, and I'm 34. I was born in a small town in Montana, where the sky felt so big it could swallow you whole, and the horizons stretched so far, you couldn't take them all in. That's where I spent my early years, among wide-open fields, old barns, and dusty roads. But my real home became Austin, Texas, a city that hummed like an old amplifier, full of life but with this soft, almost soothing energy that always calmed me down. I worked as a cinematographer, shooting ads for local brands, small festival films that rarely left a tight circle of viewers, and once, by some stroke of luck, a short for HBO. I wasn't a star, didn't chase fame, and what I had was enough. My house in the Austin suburbs was modest. 2 bedrooms, a creaky wooden porch, a coffee maker that coughed like an old man but still worked, and a bike I fixed more often than I rode. That was my life. Not loud, not flashy, but mine, and it suited me just fine. I wasn't lonely, but I didn't obsess over finding someone either. I had flings, friendships that sometimes turned into something more, and long stretches of solitude that didn't weigh on me. I loved my independence, the quiet evenings when I could sit on the porch with a mug of coffee, listening to cicadas and staring at the stars. Life flowed steady, like a river that knows its path, and I was content with the current. Then Kora came into my life. Kora showed up like a ray of sunlight on a cloudy day. Her neon red hair burned against the gray of November, like a challenge to the dull colors of fall. Her laugh was like a gulp of air after holding your breath underwater, alive, untamed, full of life. She worked at an art gallery downtown, curating exhibits with this instinct, like the world was her canvas she could repaint whenever she wanted. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about art, about lines and colors, about how a painting could tell a story without a single word. She saw the world differently, and that pulled me in. We met at a friend's party, in a cramped apartment that smelled of cheap wine, where talk about music and art drowned out the music coming from old speakers. Kora was by the window, surrounded by people but somehow apart from them. Her hair was like a beacon, her voice warm like whiskey, with a slight rasp that hooked you. She didn't try to stand out, she just couldn't help it. I walked over when someone spilled wine on the couch, and we started talking about random stuff, how goofy stains look on fabric, how people pretend to love music they don't get. Within an hour, I knew she loved old Tarkovsky films, got annoyed when people said espresso instead of espresso, and once tried learning the ukulele, but gave up because her fingers, she said, were too lazy. We talked until midnight, and I left with her number scribbled on a napkin. 2 days later, we met for coffee. A week after that, for dinner. 2 weeks later, she was staying over. Her presence was like a flash, bright but not blinding, and I couldn't look away. Within a month, her clothes took up half my closet, her toothbrush sat next to mine, and her little notebook with bird names was on the kitchen table. It happened fast, but it didn't feel rushed. It was like a movie scene where everything finally clicks, and you know it's the start of something big. Mornings with her were soft, filled with her humming in the kitchen. She'd cook breakfast, tossing ingredients together with this bold confidence, like she knew it'd turn out fine, even if she threw in too much pepper or forgot the salt. I'd fix her hairdryer, which broke every 2 weeks, grumbling while she laughed and teased me. Evenings, we'd sit on the porch, her legs across my lap, watching the sun melt into the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink. She'd jot down the names of birds she saw on the balcony, cardinal, sparrow, mockingbird, in her little notebook, and I'd try to catch them with my camera, following her curiosity. She said I taught her silence, the kind that doesn't scare you but wraps you up, makes you feel warm. I told her she was my music, a melody you feel in your chest even if you can't hum it. Our life was simple, but full. We'd wander Austin, hit up little cafes with cracked mugs, or stroll through parks where she'd watch squirrels for hours while I filmed her in the glow of sunset. She'd talk about the artists whose work she showed, how their paintings made her feel, and I'd listen, even if I didn't always get it. I'd show her my old shoots, talk about how light hits an actor's face, how you can capture a moment that'll never come back. We were like two puzzle pieces that unexpectedly fit, and it was easy, natural, like it was always meant to be. But nothing stays the same. Somewhere along the way, something foreign slipped into our life. It was like sand in the gears of a clock. At first you don't notice, but then it starts to creak, slow down, until it stops altogether. Kora asked a lot about my childhood. She was especially curious about my mom. What did she cook? Did she sing to me before bed? How did we spend Christmas? Why did my parents split? What were our traditions? At first, I thought it was her way of getting to know me better, piecing together my life to understand who I was. I told her about how Mom made overcooked turkey for Christmas, how she'd hum old folk songs thinking I was asleep, about the divorce that broke our family when I was 14, bouncing me between houses like a ping-pong ball. Kora listened with this intensity that made me feel exposed, like she saw right through me, saw things I didn't want to notice myself. Her questions weren't just curiosity. There was this insistence, almost an obsession, like she was looking for confirmation of something she already knew, but needed to hear from me. Sometimes she asked things that felt off, almost out of place. What was my first teacher's name? What was Mom's favorite book? Was she strict? I answered, but each time, something inside me tightened, like her interest was more than just interest, something I couldn't quite grasp. I brushed it off. People want to know about their partner's past, right? That's normal. But her questions were like needles, pricking so subtly you don't notice until you see tiny drops of blood. I told myself it was just paranoia, that I was making problems where there weren't any. But the doubts grew louder, like wind before a storm. One day I came home and saw a photo on the living room wall. An old one. Me and Mom in Yellowstone. I was 10. I was in a dorky Panama hat I hated, and she had this smile that seemed too big for her small frame. That photo had been collecting dust in a box of family albums in the closet for years. I never pulled it out, never showed it to Kora. When I asked where it came from, she smiled, her eyes glinting like she'd been waiting for the question. "You never said your mom had such beautiful eyes," she said, her voice light, almost weightless, like a feather falling too slowly. But something inside me clenched, like I'd swallowed something cold. I smiled back, but the air in the room got thicker, heavier than it should have been. A couple weeks later, I caught her reading my mom's memoirs. Mom wrote them years ago, a personal project she never published, pages printed on an old printer, hand-bound into a makeshift book I kept on a shelf as a keepsake. Kora was at the kitchen table, the book open, pencil marks in the margins. Her fingers moved fast, like she was searching for something specific, something vital. When I asked what she was doing, she looked up, and there was something strange in her eyes, a mix of awe, unease, and something I couldn't name. "Just amazed at how she saw the world," she said. "You're a lot like her, even if you don't want to admit it." Her words cut like a knife. I'd spent my whole life trying to be my own person, separate from my mom's shadow. She was a complicated woman, strong but distant, with an inner world I could never fully understand. Her life was like a book written in a language I knew but couldn't read fluently. I didn't want to be like her. I built my life, my career, my habits to be distinct, to avoid her mistakes, her distance, her loneliness. But Kora seemed to see something else, something she was chasing in those pages. In me, in the fragments of my past, she was collecting like a mosaic. The changes came slowly, but relentlessly, like shadows stretching toward evening. Kora started wearing sweaters like my mom's, long gray-blue, soft, like they were made to wrap you up, protect you from a cold that wasn't there. I noticed it one night when we were having dinner at her place. The sweater hung on her shoulders just like Mom's, and for a moment, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It was like déjà vu, but not the cozy kind. It was unsettling, like someone had been rummaging through my memories without asking, touching them, rearranging them. She started suggesting we visit my mom more often. "Family's important," she'd say, with a smile that was too bright, too rehearsed, like an actress who knew her lines by heart. I didn't argue. Mom lived nearby, in a quiet Austin neighborhood where the houses were old but well kept, and the trees cast long shadows on the sidewalks. My relationship with her was always complicated, but steady, a fragile balance built on unspoken words and careful gestures. I thought Kora just wanted to be part of that, to weave herself deeper into my life, to get closer to my family. But there was something in how she acted with Mom. Fleeting glances, smiles that lingered too long, gestures that felt too intimate for just friendship. I noticed little things, how Kora would look at her phone, her face unreadable, then soften quickly, like she was hiding something. How her voice trembled when she talked about Mom, not from nerves, but from something else I couldn't pin down. How she'd freeze when I walked into a room unexpectedly, like I'd caught her doing something I wasn't supposed to see. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was inventing problems where there weren't any. I was always good at doubting my instincts, chalking them up to paranoia, exhaustion, anything to avoid digging deeper. Then there was the smell, faint, warm, with notes of lily of the valley and musk. My mom's perfume, Wild Garden. She'd worn it for as long as I could remember, and over the years I'd almost stopped noticing it, like it was part of the background, like wind or the creak of the porch. But now it was in our house. I smelled it one evening when I got back from a shoot, and it hit me like a memory I didn't want to recall. At first, I thought it was from Mom's visit the week before. She'd stopped by to pick up some old books I was keeping for her, but the scent was too fresh, too alive. I checked the bathroom, the drawers, the boxes Kora had been sorting in the closet, and I found it. A bottle. New. Almost full. That perfume hadn't been sold in stores for years. Mom ordered it from some little British shop by mail with this old-school stubbornness. I stood there, holding the bottle, feeling my lungs tighten like someone was squeezing them. Kora was in the living room, sipping tea, and when I looked at her, she met my gaze like nothing was wrong. Her eyes were calm, but there was something in them I couldn't read. I didn't ask. I just put the bottle back and walked to another room. The next day, she said she was going to a friend's. I stayed home, but something was burning inside me, like I'd swallowed hot coal. Something told me she was lying. I waited an hour, then got in my car and followed her. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I had to know. When I pulled into Mom's neighborhood, I saw her car parked at the house. It was like a punch to the chest. Cold, heavy, knocking the air out of me. I stayed in the car, too afraid to get closer. Through the window, I saw Kora open the door with her own key, smiling, walking in like she owned the place. Her movements were so confident, so natural, I felt the ground slip out from under me. I didn't follow her, didn't knock, didn't make a scene. I just drove away. The image of her walking into my mom's house burned into my mind like a frame from a film I didn't want to shoot. That night, I didn't sleep. My head pounded with questions. Why? What for? How? But none of them had answers I could stomach. I lay in the dark, listening to the kitchen clock tick, the house creaking as it settled under its own weight. The next morning, I went home, hoping Kora wouldn't be there. I wanted silence, space, just one day to process what I'd seen. But her car was already in the driveway, like a silent accusation. I walked in. The house smelled of oranges and lavender, but that scent was tainted by another, Mom's perfume, lingering in the air like a ghost. Kora was in the kitchen, in a robe, white with embroidered patterns on the sleeves. My mom's robe. I'd seen it too many times growing up to mistake it. She wore it in the mornings, drinking tea and reading the paper, or in the evenings, curled up on the couch with a book. My stomach twisted, like I'd been punched. Kora turned, said something light, almost carefree. I didn't hear the words. Blood roared in my ears, drowning everything out. I stared at her. For a long time, without a word. She froze, her hand shook, and the cup she was holding slipped and shattered on the floor. Shards scattered across the kitchen, the sound of breaking glass like the final note in a symphony I didn't want to hear. She didn't clean it up, didn't say anything. Just walked past me, grabbed her keys, and left. The door closed softly. No slam, no drama. I was alone, surrounded by shards, with the smell of oranges, lily of the valley, and musk, and the piercing realization that everything I'd feared was real. I couldn't sit still. That evening, I drove to Mom's. She opened the door like she'd been expecting me. She was wearing a blouse I'd given her 3 years ago for her birthday, her hair neatly tucked, her face calm, too calm. We sat in the living room, on the couch where I used to lie with a fever while she put a cold compress on my forehead. Everything looked the same couch, the same smell of old wood and lavender, the same shadows on the walls. But nothing was the same anymore. I didn't ask questions, just waited. She spoke first, her voice steady, almost meditative, like she was reciting a memorized script. She said Kora came into her life by chance, at a gallery exhibit, then a lecture where they got to talking. It wasn't a romance, she said. It was something complicated, unhealthy, like they were both looking for something in each other that they were missing. Kora was searching for a mother she never had, and Mom saw herself in Kora, young, hungry, lost. They got tangled up in it, she said. They didn't mean to ruin my life, didn't want me to get hurt, but it happened. I listened, swallowing her words like poison. They burned, but I didn't interrupt. She didn't apologize, didn't ask for forgiveness, just looked at me, her eyes searching for something I couldn't give her. I asked, why? Not with words, but with my eyes. She looked away, for the first time in the conversation. The silence was heavy, like lead. I stood up. Didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't make a scene, just left. She didn't stop me, didn't call out. Only said quietly as I reached the door, "You have every right to be angry. I don't expect forgiveness." I closed the door behind me and stood on the porch, breathing in the cold night air. I wasn't her son anymore. I didn't know who I was. I vanished. Not physically, inside. I moved through the house like it was a set, looked in the mirror and saw nothing. No anger, no pain, no questions. Just emptiness. I became a draft of myself, a sketch no one bothered to finish. I deleted my social media, stopped answering friends, canceled all my shoots. My camera sat untouched, gathering dust like some forgotten relic. It felt like it belonged to someone else, from another life. At night, I'd flip through old photos, of Kora, of Mom, and suddenly, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Their smiles were the same. The corners of their mouths turned up just enough to seem genuine, but with a faint shadow of something hidden. They tilted their heads the same way, slightly to the right, when resting on someone's shoulder. They looked at the camera the same, with a slight squint, like they knew something I didn't. I hadn't seen it before, didn't want to, but now it was like a burn, obvious and painful. Friends started reaching out, worried. Some called, left voicemails I didn't listen to. One of them, Nick, convinced me to meet at a bar. We sat in a dim corner where the noise of other conversations drowned out the silence. Nick avoided my eyes for a while, sipping his beer and talking about nothing. Weather, basketball, a new pub downtown. Then he said, "We knew." I didn't get it at first. Thought he meant the neighbor, Mark, who I'd suspected of something with Kora. But no. He was talking about Kora and Mom. He'd seen Kora leaving Mom's house late at night, seen them exchange looks that were too long, too loaded. He thought it wasn't his business, that I'd figure it out. I walked out mid-sentence, didn't say a word, stepped into the rain and stood there until it soaked me through. I didn't care. It wasn't just one person's betrayal. It was the collapse of the whole world I thought was mine. My home, my memories, my life. It all turned out to be fragile as glass, now lying in shards. I lived on autopilot. Woke up because my body couldn't stay in bed forever. Ate so I wouldn't feel sick from hunger. Slept because there was nothing else to do. The house turned dark, like a tomb. I lowered the blinds, hid the mirrors, put away the photos. Sometimes, just to hear any sound, I'd manually turn on the old fridge. It hummed like an engine from another time, and it was the only thing that felt steady. One day, I dropped a cup, the one Kora used for tea. It shattered, and I didn't clean it up. Came back 2 days later, and the pieces were still there, like an anchor, proof I still existed, even if I didn't feel it. I stopped feeling time. Days bled into weeks, thick like oil. I could go without leaving the house until the mailman started leaving notes threatening to take packages back. I started driving at night, no destination, on highways outside the city. I'd stop at empty gas stations, drink cheap coffee, look into the eyes of cashiers who didn't know I was dead inside. Their faces were blank like mine, but for different reasons. They were just doing their jobs. One night the cops pulled me over, thought I was high because I was driving too slow, staring into nothing. I was clean. They checked my ID, shone a flashlight in my eyes, and let me go. But that moment, the headlights, the questions, the report, shook me, like someone flipped on a light in a dark room. I didn't want to live, but I was tired of falling. I signed up for therapy, not because I believed in healing, because I was tired of being a shadow. The therapist was calm, didn't push, didn't make me talk. Sometimes we just sat in silence, and it was more comfortable than I expected. One day he said, "You don't have to forgive, but you can let yourself live." It wasn't a miracle, not some big revelation, but it was a start, like the first step after a long fall. Kora came back into my life in the spring, not like a storm, but like a whisper, a text. I'd like to talk, not for forgiveness, for understanding. I stared at the screen for hours, fingers hovering over the keyboard, but I didn't write back, deleted it and turned off my phone. A week later, a letter came, handwritten, in a plain white envelope, no return address. Her handwriting, familiar but foreign. The paper smelled like her, not the Kora I knew, with her orange shampoo and faint coffee scent, but a new one, unfamiliar, with a bitter note, like wormwood. She wrote that she wasn't looking for excuses, that a lot of it was unhealthy, wrong, broken, that her thing with my mom wasn't love. It was blindness, a way to fill a void, an escape from herself. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just wanted me to know, to hear her. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw the letter away. It sat on my desk, like a grenade with the pin pulled untouched. A week later, she showed up at my house. No warning, just stood on the porch, in an old coat I recognized, but that looked too big on her now. Her hair was shorter, less vibrant, like the fall had faded with her. I opened the door, silent. She came in, looked around. The house was different, empty, no traces of our past. Blinds down, photos gone, mirrors hidden. The air smelled only of coffee and wood, no lily of the valley, no oranges. We sat across from each other, talked little. She told me about therapy, about staying with her aunt in another city, about trying to find herself without clinging to others. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, but steady. She asked if I hated her. I looked into her eyes and said, "No," then added, "But I don't love you either." It wasn't cruelty. It was the truth. She nodded, like she'd expected it. We sat in silence for a long time until she stood up. She didn't ask to stay, didn't ask for a second chance. It wasn't a conversation. It was a goodbye. She left in the rain, no umbrella, her silhouette fading into the gray haze. I thought that was the end, that she was gone for good, and in a way she was. Then came a call from the hospital. Not from Kora, from a doctor. Mom. Cancer. Late stage, metastases. Not months, weeks. I went to her, not out of duty but because I had to. She was in a hospital bed, aged, pale, but her eyes were still alive, sharp as a blade. She didn't look broken, even now, and that somehow pissed me off. I stood by her bed, looking at her, and there was no anger, no pain, just emptiness. She didn't say sorry, didn't say forgive me, just looked at me, like she was searching for her reflection in my eyes, her shadow. I didn't want to give her that. She started talking, first about my childhood, how I was scared of the dark and slept hugging a plush lion she gave me for my 5th birthday. Then about herself, how she couldn't stop herself, how there was too much emptiness inside her, how Kora was her mirror, a conversation with the person she used to be. She said she didn't expect me to stay, that she didn't deserve it, that she'd lost me long before Kora because she built walls instead of a home. I stayed quiet, couldn't find words that wouldn't be a lie. Before I left, I took her hand, briefly, like saying goodbye to someone who used to be everything and became nothing. I walked out, looked back. She was lying with her eyes closed, and the world went still. I knew I wouldn't see her again. And it didn't hurt. It was freedom. 6 months passed. Summer in Austin was hot, but the heat didn't crush me. It burned away the remnants of the past, like a fire that cleanses instead of destroys. I moved. Not because I was running, but because I'd outgrown the old walls. The new place was smaller. Wooden floors, warm light, a bookshelf I built myself, plank by plank, screw by screw. It was my home, a blank page, no traces of anyone else's breath. I got a dog, Flynn, a stubborn mutt from the shelter who slept at my feet, woke up before me, and brought my slippers, though I never taught him to. He was funny, attuned, with eyes that saw more than I expected. I started cooking, slowly, thoughtfully, trying recipes I'd never dared touch before. I listened to music, not to drown out the silence, but to enjoy it. Signed up for photography classes, started driving out of town to shoot fields, roads, abandoned cafes, old gas stations. The world was different, or maybe I'd learned to see it, not through the shadows of the past, but through the light of the present. Kora and Mom became scars, not wounds. They didn't hurt anymore, but they were there, like lines on skin that tell a story, but don't define it. I didn't forgive them, but I didn't hold a grudge either. They were part of my path, not a chapter, but a backdrop, a contrast that makes the light brighter. I stopped checking my phone, looking for faces in crowds, waiting for letters. Everything that mattered was inside me now. What would you do in my shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments.